Burnside QC. Welcome to the program, Julian, and we do thank you for your time so late in the evening.
No problem.
Julian, can you tell us the tipping point for yourself and for James Hird for him to be able to acknowledge that he had to take his responsibility in this situation and accept the 12-month ban?
The driving consideration for James right from the start was to do the best he could for the players whom he loves, the club which he loves, and the game which he loves. Against that, there was a sense of profound injustice that after 6 or 7 months of absolutely horrendous slagging off in the press, where he has kept quiet because he was asked to keep quiet. He's been brutally maligned in the press over 6 or 7 months. I don't know how he's managed to survive it. And he has desperately wanted to show that he was not guilty of anything. But against that, he wanted to do the right thing by the club and the game. And I reckon, to be honest, I reckon what he did tonight was nothing short of heroic.
Julian, Tim Lane here. Did he experience pressure from the club to come to the position that he eventually did?
No, the real pressure that James has been struggling with is the tension on the one hand of wanting to restore his reputation, which has been so beaten up in the last 6 or 8 months, and on the other hand, wanting to do the right thing by the players and the club and the game. And, you know, that's an incredibly hard thing to do. I don't know many people who would be brave enough to do it the way James did.
Nevertheless, there has been a 180-degree turnaround here from both the club and from James. Paul Little declared his absolute loss of confidence in the AFL's executive as recently as Saturday night. And clearly James's position was pretty trenchant, not too far out from tonight. So why is it that both have eventually seen fit to accept what the AFL wanted them to?
It's not a change of position at all. It is ultimately a measure of both men's dedication to the club and the game that has led them to do what they think will minimise the harm which the game has been suffering. Now, the game has been suffering harm because someone has been leaking immense amounts of detail, much of it false, into the media, so that we've had this onslaught of adverse press in the last 6 months. And if you imagine yourself, have your readers imagine themselves in that position where they're being criticised trenchantly in the media for month upon month, and they know that they've done nothing wrong, and they want to prove that they've done nothing wrong, but they know that the process of arguing a lengthy hearing, and this would have gone for weeks and weeks, that process would have caused increasing damage to the club and to the game. So what do? You swallow your hurt feelings and you brace yourself and you take what is an incredibly brave decision. And I don't think they've changed their stance at all. What they've done is bring themselves to the courageous position where they can do what the AFL wanted them to do in order to help save the club and the game. Did you
hear Mike Fitzpatrick just a few minutes ago at his and Andrew Demetriou's media conference say that there is no evidence, as far as he's concerned, of leaking that's occurred in this process? And if you did, or even if you didn't, what's your reaction to such a comment?
I did hear him say that. I also heard him say that that they're not going to investigate it internally. If you want evidence of leaking, have a look at the content of the news reports over the last 6 months, and but in particular since the Asada report was handed down, and you see again and again and again evidence before the Asada inquiry being quoted in the press, evidence of the findings and reasoning in the Asada interim report being quoted in the press. That came from somewhere. And you've got to ask yourself, who would have an interest in leaking that sort of stuff to the press? It's all secret. It's all confidential. Who would have an interest in leaking that to the press? Now, I would have thought, acting responsibly, the AFL might say, well, maybe we better have a look at our internal processes to see whether we have had any responsibility in this. I'm not suggesting that Mike Fitzpatrick knows or even suspects that there were leaks, but at least you've got to say the facts suggest that there have been leaks from the AFL, and they ought to investigate that.
Julian, the other thing that Mike Fitzpatrick did say was that James fronted the Commission for 7 or 8 minutes and apologised to the Commission for his role in bringing the game into disrepute. The one thing that stands, I think, unknown at this stage, and we were told by Andrew Demetrio that the list of charges will be made public, is what is he actually apologised for, and what were the charges he finally accepted that enables him to deal with a 12-month suspension?
He did not plead guilty to any charge at all. The only charge that was brought against him, and which was not the subject of a hearing or a conviction, was bringing the game into conduct unbecoming, or conduct likely to bring the game of football into disrepute. Now, the key to that is its conduct. What was said against him was that he didn't do things, he didn't notice things, he didn't take steps. It's difficult to see how not doing something can be said to be conduct, but more than that, the reality of things, as people who've been reading the press will know, is that a couple of cowboys came into the joint, and despite James laying down firm, clear rules about what was to be done, the suggestion is that those people acted in defiance of those rules, and James was not aware of that. He made it very clear right from the start when those characters started working at Essendon. He made it clear that anything given to the players had to be legal, had to be okayed by ASADA and WADA, and it had to be approved by the club doctor, and had to be given with the informed consent of the players. And he reiterated that rule several times and really firmly. Now, you'd have to say, well, what more is a bloke supposed to do? And what has caused damage to the game is that the fact that he was not able to see that the rules were being broken, if they were, and that's not even been established, or is it the fact that there's been immense publicity coming out of the ASADA inquiry, notwithstanding the confidentiality of that inquiry?
We're talking to Julian Burnside, QC for James Hird, who today has accepted a 12-month penalty. Did he in fact then apologise, Julian, to the Commission as has been suggested?
He did say how sorry he was that all this has happened. And, that's, I think it's important to understand that saying you're sorry is an expression of regret, regret that something's happened.
Yep.
It's not the same as saying I did something bad and that was naughty. I mean, I know the evidence in this case probably as well as anyone does, and in my opinion, he did absolutely nothing wrong, and he has behaved with remarkable grace over the last 6 months.
So how then do you deal with the matter of senior executive accountability and a football coach within the pyramid of administration of people at a football club is a senior executive?
That's a really good question, and it'd be a pity, I think, if sporting clubs had to be run as if they were, top-line commercial companies. You don't really expect a footy club to have to run along the lines of BHP. But it seems that, if this approach is to be taken, well then, that's the way it'll go.
But if young men are being administered substances, the identity of which can't even be confirmed, someone has to take responsibility for that, don't they, at a senior executive level?
If someone goes rogue in an organisation, then the question is it reasonable to criticise people for the fact that they weren't aware that someone had gone rogue? That's really what it comes to. There is no suggestion in any of the evidence that any of the individuals who've been brought up in front of the Commission were aware of the two rogue characters doing anything wrong. They didn't know about it. Now, what do you do about something when you don't know about it?
What about the number of injections, Julian? A lot of people in football would be just taken aback by the fact that there was this program established under James that had so many people injected to a level that we've never seen before in the game. Do you think that should have been a red flag to James that he missed?
I understand the point, but what he understood was that they're injections of vitamins. Now, using injections, there's one medical reason for using injections, which is that whatever is injected does not have to be metabolized in the gut and the liver. And that means that they can be much more effective in their intended action. That's true for vitamins as it is for other things. So I don't think that there is anything intrinsically suspicious about the fact that vitamins were to be given that way.
But there was suspicion from the doctor, who was a great ally and great friend of James, and yet those suspicions seem to have been put to one side, at least from the outside. I mean, this is where the problem is, having not spoken to James or heard from James, that we are at the unfortunate position of having to just piece together information that we can read only in the press.
That's true, and the reason you haven't heard from James on this stuff is that ASADA and then the AFL asked him to say nothing publicly about the issues, because otherwise that might contaminate the process. And I think what people need to understand is that whilst he was being asked not to speak publicly about this, he was being bagged day after day in the press on these very issues. And he desperately wanted to be able to say publicly, this is absolute nonsense, here are the facts. But he's been gagged.
What would have happened had how do we describe it, the white flag not gone up tonight? You say that James has done this because in the end the interests of the football club were paramount in his heart. What if he'd fought on? What was the alternative outcome?
To answer your direct question, yes, it was because the interests of the club were paramount in his heart. What would have happened if he had not taken the course that he did tonight is that the charge would have been hotly contested. The AFL commissioners would have had to stand aside. The matter would have been referred to an independent arbiter, probably a recently retired Supreme Court judge or something like that. There would have been weeks of preparation as the AFL disclosed the identity of witnesses, the substance of their evidence, documents to be used, all that sort of thing. There would have been complex legal questions about the admissibility of evidence, and then there would have been, I estimate, something between 6 and 8 weeks of evidence and arguments. And all of that would have been immensely disruptive to the club, to the game, and to everyone involved. And it's in order to avoid the obvious disadvantage and damage that might cause, to avoid all of that, that he decided to take the course he did. And just think how much self-sacrifice that involves. He desperately wanted to demonstrate his innocence.
And what truths might have emerged? Because I think, in a sense, there is something a little unsatisfactory now that I have a feeling that there'll be hidden truths out of this, that basically the shutters come down from this night. And among those, the so-called Demetriou tip-off.
Yeah, well, that would have been one of the things to be fully explored, and I suspect that that's something that the AFL was not keen to have explored.
Was James disappointed, Julian, that given that he thought, to use your words, a couple of people have gone rogue within the club, that some of the players didn't come and confide in him and ask him the questions as this thing got out of hand?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question.
To use your terms, when a couple of players or a couple of people within the industry or within the club have turned rogue, to use your term, was James disappointed that he didn't get the feedback from some of the players saying, are you seriously supporting where we're going with this, to the hyperbaric chamber where unknowns are actually injecting?
James has never expressed any disappointment in any of the players. He copped it tonight and said how much he regrets what has happened. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning at this point is just how much his wife and kids have suffered through all of this. You know, it's just unbelievable.
Yep.
He's had children coming home from school in tears because of things said to them about their friends, about what they've heard about on the television, you know?
Yeah, it'd be impossible to imagine just what the family have gone through. I think you make a very strong point. It's a point I think we've all considered over this interminable 7 or 8 months.
Julian, just a word as we near the end of this conversation about your experience of dealing amid the rough and tumble of the AFL and the AFL's administration in particular.
I've fought a lot of interesting cases. This one was shaping up to be amongst the more exciting of them.
Okay. And I've just received a text from someone close to me about your comments regarding James Hird. And this refers to his messages, his text messages to Stephen Dank and Bruce Reid and Danny Corcoran. And the suggestion is that they didn't show innocence and lack of knowledge as to what was going on.
Unfortunately, comments like that show the danger of jumping to conclusions when you've seen only a fragment of the evidence.
And we were presented selectively in the 34-page report that was delivered last Friday?
Yep. That wasn't a report, of course. The 34 pages that were released publicly, and in my view should never have been released publicly, those were the details of the charge against the Essendon Football Club. And, of course, people putting together a charge sheet are going to put in the bits that they reckon are useful to them, and they're not going to put in the bits that they reckon might weaken their case. And for anyone to pick out one or two things out of 34 pages of selective material, clearly they're going to form an impression that is wrong. I'm not blaming people for doing that. They're only being fed part of the picture. But those text messages by themselves, frankly, would lead people into a very mistaken view of what was going on.
Julian, it's been very enlightening. We appreciate your time, and no doubt you'll be reflecting on the events of the last couple of weeks, and we'd love to have a chat to you again in another month's time when you've further reflected. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks very much.
Julian Burnside, QC for James Hird. A break.